Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to our live demonstration and Q&A about virtual tabletop gaming, and specifically the popular virtual tabletop application, MapTool. My name is CJ, aka Riker, and with us tonight are two players from my campaign, Doug and Jen, as well as two special guests from the MapTool team, Azhrei and Keith. Right before we go any further, I'm just going to verify in the stream that everything is kosher. Can you hear us fine in the stream? Please give us a shout out. Thank you, Atrops. Alright, the purpose of tonight's event is to spread the message of virtual tabletop gaming and how virtual tabletops can serve as an enhancement or a substitute to a real-life session. Tonight's stream will be divided into two portions. First, a Q&A and discussion about MapTool and virtual tabletop gaming, which will be followed by a demonstration of what MapTool can do and how to set it up. We will be monitoring the stream chat, so feel free to chime in with questions at any time, and we'll do our best to answer them. As we talk, we'll also have our players demoing a mock battle between Coltane, the human warlord, represented by the C, and Nima, the elven avenger, represented by the N, following the D&D 4th edition rules. So why don't we begin tonight by going around the virtual table and introducing everyone. So Azhrei is currently the lead developer of MapTool, but that wasn't always the case, was it? How did you end up on the development team?
Well, I sort of fell into it. Trevor Croft is the original developer for MapTool, and he and Bill Hart were the two instigators of this particular application. Bill was the driving force, having vision for the application, and this is what it should do. And then Trevor was the code monkey who would spend long nights writing code and implementing the vision that Bill had for the game. And so over the course of a couple of years, they got an awful lot done. However, I picked it up. I had a gaming group that I ran out of my house here, mostly D&D 3.5, and I was looking for a virtual tabletop. So we used to play in my game room up here, and we started out using MapTool. Use an overhead projector, project it on a screen, really nice setup. And I got involved in it because I have some programming background in Java, and because Trevor got busy with real life, I sort of took over unofficially. I started submitting a lot of code updates, and Trevor got busy with real life and was doing less and less. And so eventually he handed the reins over to myself and one other primary programmer, Craig.
Alright, great. Thanks a lot, Azhrei. And then we have Keith Athey. Am I pronouncing your last name correctly, Keith?
We use a long A normally. It's Athey, but my family actually is divided on that issue.
Alright. So your official title on the MapTool team is Bard, which I presume is medieval parlance for sort of public relations. How would you describe your role, Keith?
I wear a number of hats. One of the things I do is maintain the rptools.net social media on Facebook, Google+, and Twitter. And so I search the web for articles about MapTool and post them there to the followers of those various sites so that they can follow what's going on in the world of MapTool. The other thing I do is follow the forums and find new frameworks that might come out or new contributions that might be there. We also have a fair number of folks that build products for MapTool that sell them on such sites as DriveThruRPG, and I try to post those out to the social networks as well to make sure people know that there are some quality products out there available for use in their MapTool games.
Fantastic. And Keith, I believe you published a novella a few months ago. Congratulations, by the way. Would you care to tell us a bit about it?
Well, oddly enough, the MapTool is the reason for the novella.
Oh, wow.
I found MapTool through a site, a dead site now called roleplayershome.net, and it was a site dedicated to D&D 3, and it had a character sheet generator as well as you could create maps on there. And my friends had separated by time and years, and they were all over from East Coast to West Coast. But these are the guys I had been gaming with since I was 15. And so I was asking how we get together. We were using play-by-post kinds of things, and somebody said, hey, there's this cool program called MapTool you should check out. And so back then we weren't hosted on this site. It was still back at the SourceForge, and that's when I first contacted Trevor and some of the other folks at the time, the Rice brothers, and others that were supporting MapTool. And I downloaded it. It was open source and ran on any platform that I was interested in, that being Macintosh and Linux and Windows. And since I'm a Linux guy, having something that ran on Linux was awfully cool. And I had friends that had Macs and friends that had PCs. And so for us, it was really the only option at the time. But what really sold me on MapTool was the first time that I made a request to Trevor. Well, it was to the board, but Trevor picked it up. And I said, hey, wouldn't it be cool if you simply did an up arrow to repeat what you just typed in chat? And a week later it was in there. And that's the way the community works. And Frank and Craig, and there's a whole host of developers that do that same thing. They take requests out of the community and fold them into MapTool, making a better and better product. And so that's one of the, if I have to nail anything that makes MapTool, in my opinion, the best thing going is it's the community support that we have from the users and the responsiveness of the developers. Which didn't answer your question at all about the novella, did it? But I went off on my bard kick. I'm sorry. No, the novella fell out of MapTool because, along with MapTool, I picked up a game called Savage Worlds. And there was a friend of mine, as my life got busier and busier with family, which is another reason I use MapTool. It takes the travel time out of gaming. I developed a character that, and I've always written stories about my characters, be their background or whatever. And I'd been doing that over time. When I was with IBM, I was traveling all over the world, and so I kept writing. And that character, I started a story, and it just got better and better, and my friends finally convinced me to publish it, and so that's what I did. So the New Moon Murders is placed in the 1930s. It's based off a Savage Worlds game. The characters are Thomas Gunn, who's your classic gumshoe. And some of the characters in there are actually characters out of the game, which the other players enjoy a great deal, seeing how I reimagine their characters into a novella. I've completed a complete novel that I'm editing now, and will probably go out by November, I suspect.
That is awesome. That sounds like every RPG gamer's dream to have a story written. So many writers or so many DMs. It seems to be DMs specifically that will become writers, and they'll try to write adventures about their D&D games. And you actually made it work, because so many don't manage to get it off the ground. I know a lot of publications will say on their do's and don'ts list, under don't, I so often see, don't write a story about your D&D game or your RPG game, and you've actually made it work. That's fantastic. That's really a testament to the story then. Well, congratulations.
Well, I originally started writing stories. I started writing stories about D&D, and the people enjoyed it a great deal, but they all read like adventures. And which is the reason they give you that advice, right? Because you're writing about an adventure, and the players that are involved in those or have been involved in adventures that you're writing about, and they love it, but everybody else they don't know the backstory, they don't know the character interaction, because we all play this game both to tell stories and to interact with other gamers, right? What made the New Moon Murders different was that I didn't do that. I actually really went in depth in the characters and what they were thinking, and made it interact with each other the way real people would versus the way gamers do, which is like if somebody's giving you a problem, you throw them off the train. So that's the reason it was successful. The other reason I think is because the way I wrote it appeals to both male and female readers. I think gamers, it's once again the gaming concept, right? You're going through a dungeon, you're beating things up, and it's sort of a machismo sort of endeavor. But in this, I really try to get down to the characters' feelings about things, and especially the handicaps that each of the characters in the story has. They're based off people I know, not gamer people, but real people that I've interacted with in the past. And I think that's why it worked, and I think that's why it's gotten the positive reviews that it has.
So that's The New Moon Murders by Keith Athey, available on Amazon.
Correct, as well as iTunes and basically anything with an ebook format, it's there.
Well, congrats again. Now, Doug, you've been playing D&D with us for a couple years now. How did you become interested in tabletop RPGs?
No.
No?
It has not been...
No, that you've been
It's
playing
been
with
less
us.
than a year, hasn't it?
Really? Has it? Huh. I feel like you've been with us forever.
Aw, thanks. What's the question? Sorry, I wanted to point out you were wrong, and I forgot the question.
How did you become interested in tabletop RPGs? Because I know you tried it out before you joined our group.
Yeah, well, I mean, I've always been a huge nerd, sci-fi, fantasy, fascination guy. Some of the coolest books in the kids section at the local library were just the D&D, I think it was 2nd edition, rule books and the monster manuals and stuff. And I didn't have anyone to play with, but I just get them out and look through them and thought it was really cool. And it wasn't until university, a friend of mine just ran a quick one-day session. We had some fun. And I was like, oh man, I really want to get in on this. And my brother was in your sessions at the time. So I made the request if you ever had a spot open. I passed the tests.
The trial.
Fun ever since.
And you mentioned one thing that is just so key to our message here tonight, and that's, I didn't know anyone who played. And so often do I hear people say either I don't know anyone who plays D&D, or there's no one in my neighborhood who plays D&D, and that's why virtual tabletop gaming is a solution that so many people are unaware of. It breaks those geographical boundaries. And I really wish more people would be aware that they have the option to find people and coordinate and communicate and get their game on when it's something that they're obviously interested in.
Yeah, plus, of course, there's the stigma that's associated with it. I mean, up until I realized that it wasn't uncool, I thought it was uncool to a certain extent, and so you don't really talk about it. You just sort of think, oh, this is cool, I'd like to play it, I wish I knew people, but you're never really openly looking for it otherwise.
And you know what? I bet as D&D and tabletop RPGs and games continue to become ingrained in the digital age, I believe that stigma will disappear, because that stigma even exists with other gamers. Like, video gamers look down, to some extent, not all, but those who aren't aware, or those who don't know too much about D&D, sort of have that haughty, oh, you play tabletop RPGs. And I think as we move forward into as we continue to modernize our hobby and take advantage of technology, I think we're going to start breaking that mentality that there are video gamers and there are tabletop gamers, and we're just going to have gamers. So Jen, you're the newest addition to our group, and you've had to learn the D&D rule set and how to use MapTool simultaneously. Do you think that's made things more difficult for you? Or do you think MapTool has, to some degree, helped you learn or remember the D&D rules?
That's a difficult question because I can't really compare with anything. This is all I know.
That's a fair answer.
I don't find that it was particularly difficult to learn stuff, but I had a lot of help, so maybe that's a little unfair too. I mean, I wasn't exactly coming into this out of the blue.
Yeah, so you've seen people playing the game for a while. When did you decide that you wanted to be a part of that?
Well, I guess it started, like, I started being curious about D&D when my 6th grade teacher, who was like the coolest teacher ever. He rode a motorcycle and he had a full suit of armor that he wore on Halloween, as well as a shield and a sword. 6th grade teacher. It's pretty cool. He was also a dungeon master, and at the time I didn't know what that was, but it sounded pretty cool, and I kind of wanted to be part of D&D, but it was a secret club or something that no one really talked about, and that kind of stuck around, that sort of thought. And then, I don't know, I got the opportunity. I was like, oh, that's cool. Maybe I should look into that. And then I learned more about it, and then I joined in.
And I think we're all happy to have you part of the group, and our viewers too are very happy to have you part of our group. So let's circle back to MapTool here, and maybe Azhrei, you'd be best suited to answer this. Can you give us a brief history of MapTool? I think you were touching upon it before.
Yeah, well, a brief history of time. Let's see. I got involved probably around version 1.1, and boy, at that time, Keith mentioned this as well. In the early days, it was pretty crude. I mean, we didn't have docking windows, and we didn't have macros, and we didn't have, I mean, there was a lot of stuff that wasn't there yet. And so back in those days, you were lucky if you could, basically you created aliases, because we didn't have macros, but you could create an alias so that when you typed in a short little / command into the chat window, it would roll the dice for you. And I remember thinking, oh man, that's really cool. And now, now we've got this MT script language, sort of a bastard version of a shell scripting language. We've got this scripting language that if you are into this type of thing, you can automate everything. I mean, Keith has his Savage Worlds framework.
Yes, I automated the living daylights out of it.
Exactly. There are frameworks for Savage Worlds and GURPS and D&D 3.5 and Pathfinder and 4.0, and there's actually a team on the forums now that are looking to put together a framework for D&D Next, which I guess will be 5th Ed, or whatever they decide to call it. And that's what really sort of jazzes me up about MapTool, is that the work that I do and Craig do, we don't build frameworks. We don't build houses. We build the tools that allow people to build houses. We build the power saws and the cordless drills and the hammers and the screwdrivers. And it's the users on the forum that do all the real work. I mean, they're the ones that are putting together these massive collections of tokens to represent PCs and NPCs and monsters, and they do the graphics work. I mean, I think there was mention earlier of Jonathan Roberts, who is a very talented artist, and he's donated an awful lot of artwork for MapTool. He uses it in his own games, and it's his way of giving back to the community. And that's pretty much how we all feel. Keith and myself and Bill and Craig and pretty much everybody that's involved in MapTool, whether it's part of the core team or whether it's our user community. So over time, things just sort of evolve. And that's actually a bit of a problem for MapTool right now, is that it has evolved. It really needs to be stripped down to its core functional components, redesigned, and then built back up again. Basically, we have a house that we have been adding on to. We've added a second floor, and we've added a porch out on the back, and we've added a screened-in room on the front, and it looks like a house that has been added onto, for 20 years. And so we really need to sort of take MapTool, I won't say back to its roots, but we need to decompose it and come up with the important functional blocks and then rebuild it back up again in a manner in which it is designed and not just sort of packed together over a long period of time. And that's really our goal. The new version that Craig and I have, a gleam in our eye about, the 1.4, currently we're on 1.3, build 87 is the most recent stable build. And the 1.4 that we're thinking about is going to be that decompose that I was talking about. We're planning on breaking it into functional modules and doing all of the design work that has been left out over time. And then once we do that, the next step, which this could be a long time down the road, but the next step would be a 2.0. And the 2.0 is where we'll build it back up again. And we'll include a new GUI, we'll include, I mean, that's one of the biggest problems that MapTool has, is the GUI looks like it was designed back in the 80s. And, well, maybe not 80s, probably early 90s. But the GUI is just not, there's no glitz, there's no eye candy. And so that's one of the things we want to do, is make the code more modular so that we can patch in new user interfaces and patch in, new functionality more easily, and yet do it under control, so we don't end up with that house that has had rooms added onto it over the years. So that's sort of a long way of saying that, we know where we've been, we know where we are now, we know where we want to go, at least in the near term, in the next year or two. We have a pretty good idea of where we want to be. And then we're hoping that where that will put us in 2 years is at a point where the future from that point on will be easier to implement, and it'll be more modular, so people can choose which pieces they want and which pieces they don't want. One of our goals, as I said, is to build tools. We don't want to build houses. We want to build tools and let our users build the houses. All right, anyway, so that's my long story as to where MapTool has been and what we hope to accomplish in the somewhat near future.
I'll add a little bit to that. I'll tell you that, as I spoke earlier about MapTool being a community-driven tool, and so as MapTool gained success, different people had different needs, and Frank and the rest of the developers have done an outstanding job at providing those. And to extend his house analogy, it's almost as though you've had one house where you've had a set of German settlers come in, then you've had a set of Russian settlers come in, and Middle Eastern settlers come in, and so you've got all sorts of different architectures that are in place and sort of glued together to make MapTool up. And that's one of the things that is a real strength, which means that the MapTool at its core does what gamers need it to do. And Frank's exactly right that in the future what we hope to do is give you basically the tools in order to build whatever game system you need to build. MapTool does wonderfully with Savage Worlds, and like I said, I've automated the living daylights out of it. Every flavor of D&D, World of Warcraft, Shadowrun, Hero System, almost anything out there that is on the market that there's a substantial user base for. There is a framework for MapTool, and that's available on the forums. And that's just users going out there, free of charge, is saying, I've done this, I want to share it, which is indeed the real strength of open source development, which, MapTool is an open source product. You can download the source code now and compile it if you wanted to and run it, make changes to it, run it on your local system, and it'd be great. But the developer community is so responsive to user needs that people generally don't see the need to do that. And so that's one of the things that makes MapTool really great.
Keith, would you like to explain in layman's terms what a framework is?
Framework, as Frank was saying, there's this thing called MT script, which is a really powerful tool. It started out as in MapTool, as people are watching and seeing the work going on the screen. You have a token, and there are properties on that token, and that was like step 1. That was version 1.1 or something like that, where you could put strength, dexterity, intelligence, all those stats on the token itself, so you could bring it up and take a look at those stats. At some point along the way, it's back in the days when Trevor was the main code hack on MapTool, we asked that in the chat commands if we could have access to those properties. In other words, if you had a strength, that you could access that in a formula kind of method inside the chat window. Well, he did that, and that opened up Pandora's box from that point forward. And I'll have to say, my impression was always Trevor was never completely comfortable with that. He wanted MapTool to automatically do so much for you. But the user community said, no, we want to write our own formulas for things. And so that functionality came in. It was the famous if statement that a guy named Riss put in there. And it was just an if statement like you'd find inside of Excel that was a three-state kind of thing. If this, then that, if not, then this kind of thing. Well, that opened up everything. From that point forward, you had these developers that could download the source code and modify it, start adding more and more macro functionality. Well, eventually, and it was Craig, who's one of the other main developers on MapTool, he put in the ability to put an HTML window inside of MapTool. And so at that point forward, you could actually code HTML with these macro commands behind it, just like you would any other web application, so that you could have a link that ran a dice command, or you could have a button that brought up another window and did special things in there. And so a framework is, at its base level, a set of macro language that is tied together in either a button on the macro windows, or as part of an HTML frame, or as part of there's other graphics interfaces you can do in there called input, that you can make the same kinds of things you can in the HTML frame. So in my case, I took the HTML framework and built a Savage Worlds framework off of that. But a lot of people just have a set of buttons that they use to run different commands. In the case of D&D, it would be your attack command for your chosen weapon, a spell, or in D&D 4E, the powers that are available there, the buttons that do all that stuff, people develop frameworks for. And so what it does for my players, the Savage World folks that I've introduced into MapTool, they don't have to know that much about the Savage Worlds rule set, as one of your players was saying earlier. It's what they knew. They're used to the automation. And I will say, when I have to drop back to a tabletop game, it's really a handicap now, because my framework does so much for me. It knows the rules, and so I don't have to add this and subtract that out of a roll. It knows what that needs to be. And some people get that in depth and code just about every rule in a book, whereas other people want a very minimalistic approach to a framework, and it just does the bare minimum. It does a dice roll, and then you still go back just like you would at a tabletop and know what the rules are, and change your roll based off whatever rules and powers your character may have. And so a framework looks very differently depending on who created it. Some are the full-featured things like what I have. Others are just almost like a dice roller that's part of MapTool.
I remember when I first started using MapTool years ago now. I don't think frameworks even existed at the time, to be honest. Or if they did, I wasn't aware of them. We were new to MapTool, and I had a player that started coming up with macros that would automate his attack, and he came up with this on his own, and he showed it to me, and I thought, hey, that's pretty neat. And then as the years went by, and I was perusing the MapTool forums, I noticed I was reading up about frameworks and what they are, and now to think about using MapTool, the way I was just running a real life session I had actual physical character sheets with me at my desk, and I was erasing, while nowadays I have the character sheet built into MapTool doing the work for me, as Keith was explaining. It's really amazing how far MapTool has come, how far the community has come. As both Keith and Azhrei said, the community is such a strong aspect. It's a friendly community. So often, I'm a code noob. Yet I've managed to make some modifications to code and frameworks to fit my game, partly thanks to the community. I'd go in and I'd say, hey guys, I've been busting my head against the wall trying to figure out how to change this. Can someone help me out? And very receptive and friendly community. And the MapTool script, or the creating macros, for someone not familiar with coding, I suppose all that language is sort of scary, but I was able to get stuff to work, and I know next to nothing. So I'm sure anyone is capable of, at the very least, just installing a framework, and then if they want to look into it further, making little modifications here and there, if they want to personalize it. And that's really the beauty of MapTool. You can personalize the experience